Now it's going, don't worry. Hi, Polly. Good afternoon for me. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining again, Breakfast at Kuznach.
Thank you, Stefano, for having me. And yes, it's breakfast time here.
Last week, there was a big conference, Analysis and Activism Conference. Analysis and Activism is an experiment about psychoanalysis and activism. You were one of the speakers, and your lecture interests me very much. That's why we decided to meet again after our first conversation last spring about coronavirus, Buddhism, and death. Today we will talk about something else, but something that is very current, especially looking at the fact that in 10 days, 2 weeks, we might have a new president of the United States, or the confirmation of the same presidents. There is a lot of paranoia, a lot of aggressivity. But today we're going to talk about something interesting. Moral superiority of the left, moral authoritarianism of the left, and the uncertainty of truth, or in a time of uncertainty. What is the moral superiority of the left?
Well, let me say that I think I need to define what I mean by moral superiority. But before I do that, I'm going to read a quote from a 2020 memoir by Diana Johnston, who is an independent journalist who lives in Paris. She's been a progressive independent journalist all of her life. She's 86 years old. And the memoir is called The Circle of Darkness, a memoir of a world watcher. She's American by birth, but mostly has lived in Europe and reported on particularly Eurocommunism and also left politics in Europe. And I found her work extraordinary. She's written a number of books, but I came across her writing through Consortium News, which is a progressive independent newspaper online. And the article was called The 2020 Elections, Bourgeois Democracy Meets World Governance. And that article not only threw me for a loop, but also I recognized its truth and its value almost immediately, because I've been doing an interview program called Pay Attention, interviews about truth in troubling times. And I'd been particularly pursuing issues surrounding 2 or 3 topics. One is consciousness. What is consciousness? Is it related to the brain? Can you find it in the brain? Or is it something else that we can't find in the brain that might be the basis for all of our sciences? And so that's one topic I was pursuing. I was also pursuing health and immunity, about the COVID virus. You know, what is the virus? What are the truths that are being reported, because epidemiologists disagree? And then the third topic was this topic of investigative journalism. And there I was interested not so much in politics, because actually I think that both of the US parties, and I happen to be in the US, are incoherent and untrustworthy and corrupt. So I had backed away. I had been a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and I had backed away from US politics when I saw that in this, in the last election, clearly there was an arrangement in the Democratic National Committee that Bernie would not be able to be the candidate. That was my first recognition. This whole thing is really corrupt. And then in this election, the interesting thing for me is that I could recognize that Biden had some sort of dementia, because my husband died from early onset Alzheimer's. So during the debates of the 2020 candidates, I thought, this is cruel to include a candidate on stage who cannot follow the sequencing of his own thoughts or the sequencing of other people's thoughts, because that breaks down with the breakdown of short-term memory in the prefrontal cortex. That's often the very first sign of a a cognitive impairment, a mild cognitive impairment, as things are called these days. So then when Biden turned out to be the candidate, I thought, I am going to step away from this political thing entirely, and I'm going to try to understand what's happening with, let's say, my side of the screen, which is progressive. So people often say to me, why am I not investigating, conservatives and the right? Because I haven't participated. I mean, I know progressive politics pretty well. I have never been very political because I don't think that the truth is associated with politics, but that's where I have participated. I've been very much of a social activist, but not a political activist. So that's one thing. And then, so I want to start with a quote from Diana Johnston, and then I'll get back to the two things. What's moral superiority? What's going on with this kind of authoritarian kind of process on the left? So here's a quote from her. This is near the end of her memoir. Much of the far left sees its villains in purely moral rather than politico-economic terms. People on the right are simply bad people with bad attitudes. For the Antifa in particular, people on the extreme right, for them a broad category, must be opposed by censorship or violence, not by rational argument. So that's one of the quotes. And then another one that I want to raise just to frame this bigger conversation. We have reached a point where most significant division in Western society may well be the sharp break between those whose view of reality is guided by the common discourse and those who see that as false. We see friendships being destroyed by this rupture in belief. The non-believers do not agree among themselves, but at least they are alike in attempting to revive free critical thinking. And she concludes by saying the fight for truth is the most critical battle in our emerging civil wars. So long as people fail to distinguish between manipulation and honesty, between truth and falsehood, they can neither define correctly what is wrong nor find solutions. So I agree with that very, very much. And so, in order to actually have in any civil society any kind of debate or dialogue, which is necessary for science, for religion, and certainly for politics, you have to have a kind of humanizing of your emotions. That means that you as a human being recognize that you don't have to impulsively discharge your emotions or impulsively use your emotions to color all of your perceptions. You have to be able to contain yourself. So religions have helped people with that. Psychoanalysis helps people with that. And usually in the past, civil discourse was considered sort of one of those ways in which we did have to contain and be polite and be respectful, because there was the notion that everyone has a divine spark, something worth respect. You can God within the individual, or for a Buddhist like myself, it's the Buddha nature. Everyone is a Buddha. We bow to everyone because they have that nature. All human beings have this capacity to step back from a discharge of their emotions. So, on the left, in these recent times, of course, that has not happened. Instead, there's an encouragement of something called calling out culture. And Antifa and the group of so-called anti-fascists, who often proceed by a fascist kind of process, actually do say you should not debate, you should simply call out. You don't take the effort to debate. You simply stop the conversation, you call out, or you use violence. Now, in order to do that as a human being against another person, you have to dehumanize that person. Now, we know that from wars. We know from time immemorial that humans have been at war pretty much since Homo sapiens dominated the earth. They have dominated it by killing en masse other humans that were not Homo sapiens. The Homo sapien was the most violent and also the most warlike, and began doing massive killings even during the time of hunter-gatherers. And we could return to that, but it's all in Sapiens by Harari, which is a book, again, that I almost consider to be a Bible now. I read it and reread it. So this capacity to dehumanize is very much within us all the time. It's hard to resist it, in fact. And the way that it comes about, we know now from a lot of research on moral development, and I would cite someone like Jonathan Haidt, or Jonathan Haidt, however you want to pronounce it. His work on moral development, as well as the people that work on the emotions, the research on the primary and secondary emotions. So all human infants are hardwired with a set of emotions. Those things used to be called instincts. Now they tend to be called emotions that actually drive our perceptions. They drive our perceptions all of our lives, not just when we're young, but when we're infants and we don't have language and we don't have culture, we have to communicate because our lives are at stake, and we communicate through our emotions. So we project, we identify, we project and identify. The mother and the infant have this strong communication. So among the primary emotions that infants are born with is disgust. And disgust is the motivation to move away from something that's toxic, to move away back from something that's disgusting, that's poisonous, that is toxic. It lowers our blood pressure, makes us more lizard-like, you might say. All of our other emotions, our primary emotions, increase our blood pressure and our, let's say, arousal, but disgust pulls us back. So now we know from a lot of research on the development of morality that what undergirds human morality is disgust. In other words, the very first step about, let's say, being cautious about what's happening to you is motivated by that kind of, is this poisonous or is this not poisonous? Is this toxic? Is this something that I need to move away from and essentially objectify so that I can step on it? Is this a poisonous snake? Or another story I like to tell is that people feel very disgusted by the little brown field mouse because it is a nuisance. And where I live in Vermont, they get into the house a lot. And they have some problems. They have some diseases. But, they are mammals. And when I started actually coming into my battle with the field mouse, I was pretty innocent about how many were in my house. Wow. And so I was being a good Buddhist. I got the have a heart trap, and I started trapping, and pretty soon I was up to 40, 50. I had trapped them. I only had 2 traps. So I had to save the little mice in my mudroom, which is a kind of anteroom in my home, and give them a little food and water so that, because they had to stay there long enough for me to drive them, say, 5 miles away, because they can come back if they're 3 miles away. So, I was actually collecting these little brown mice and watching them. And the more I watched them, the more my emotions were humanized towards them. I was curious. Then I developed a kind of compassion, and we're having some interference.
Sorry, is my new computer has problem with the new camera. It's glitching. I hope it's okay for those watching it.
Okay, okay. It's okay for me. I mean, it's more, this is kind of a long sort of framing of what we're going to talk about, but it's, I think, important. So anyway, the thing that really stood out to me, which was kind of my personal experience, sort of my personal experiment with the field mouse, was that the more that I actually watched that field mouse with curiosity, the more my heart opened, because I began to see the mouse was washing its face, washing its ears. I put the water in, wash under its arms, and different personalities. Some were very strong and they would shake the cage, others would sit back. Then one day, one of the mice got out. It actually, I didn't know it had gotten out, so it got very weak because there was no food or water. It had escaped the trap. I put the trap back some other place, blah, blah, blah. There was a sick mouse in my mudroom. And the day that it died, it came up so that it could die next to one of the little mice in the crate. So there was a grieving process going on where there was a connection between the dying mouse and the live mouse. So I began to feel very much compassion for these little mice and to realize that they are individuals, that they have habits like ours, and so on and so forth. And what I saw was that by humanizing my disgust, by that would mean that I didn't take the position that I was morally superior to this mouse and that I had to kill it because it was a nuisance. Instead, I used the other natural tendencies that we humans have. At birth, we have compassion already built in. And we know that because little premature babies, they put them into the same kind of a container after birth, and they are stroking each other's arms to comfort each other. Sometimes you can see that also in the ultrasound in the womb where there are several infants in utero. And of course, the infant has to look at the mother and figure out, is this mother doing okay or not? And try to comfort the mother when she's not. Is this camera problem going to be a problem? Do we want to start again?
No, not for me. No, I don't think, but it will continue. I have a problem since a few weeks, and
Okay. Okay. So I just
sorry.
okay. So we have the natural compassion. Curiosity is one of the primary emotions, and so it's also there from birth. But disgust will be the emotion that will motivate us to morally condemn another being to the degree that we turn the other being into an object, and then we can actually treat the other being as though it has a relationship to us, as though it has not at all the same sensibility or subjectivity. So we can then kill it, or we can condemn it, we can trap it, put it in a prison. And what I started to see on the left, especially, was this kind of moralizing that was motivated by open, dehumanizing disgust. And it was often directed towards whatever party it was. Sometimes it's within the left itself around identity politics. Sometimes it's towards the right. It was often towards Trump. Like Trump, to me, was almost like an experiment to watch how my colleagues, particularly my thoughtful and even Buddhist colleagues, psychoanalytic colleagues, became not simply haters, but disgusted, moralizing haters.
And
So
paranoid, I would add. And
paranoid.
paranoid.
But
I would like to share a dream I actually had with Trump last night.
last night you
But
had
maybe another time.
well,
But
no,
it's
what?
interesting, especially the end of the dream is interesting for us Jungians. I will be very quick. He was somehow a very nice figure, a nice man.
Yeah,
And he came to me somehow saying, we're thinking to give you a job because you did very well in your current job. And then he said, one of my assistants will come to you and will give you a job. And it was an Afro-American woman looking like, somehow we think now Harris, so possible next vice president. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And she
So
was coming to me to instruct me on the task, on the job, moving to San Francisco or Washington. So it's interesting. My wish is that from Trump to Harris, because we know that Biden, if he wins, will not last long. But anyway.
yes, I mean, so honestly, I know too much about Harris also. I mean, it's just, I have done so much research about the actual corruption in the Democratic National Committee because of what happened to Bernie. So there's some deep problems with Harris as well. So to get away from that, though, back to your dream, the thing about your dream is that you're beginning to humanize. You're beginning in your deep mind, you're coming to meet Trump, the human being, Trump, a more complex figure. I have had a number of dreams of Trump. I mean, it always surprises me because I don't have a deep interest in Trump at all. I never did. And, like many people, I didn't think that his candidacy really made sense at all. But now that I've done much more investigation, I actually have a new interview out on the Trump-Russia affair. And in that interview, I have come to find out that one reason why Trump, won the primaries is that the Democratic National Committee was contributing to his campaign in large amounts of money and interest because they wanted him to run against Hillary. They thought that it would be a complete and utter, easy job for Hillary to defeat Trump, where they didn't think that she might defeat some of the other candidates. So to the DNC, it was a tremendous shock. I mean, an unthinkable shock, unthinkable that Trump would actually win.
Yeah.
And one way that Trump played the campaign that again has to do with disgust and has to do with moralizing, he played, in the kind of, let's say, framework of wrestling. He's one of the owners of the World Wrestling, whatever it's called. It's not foundation, but it's like
association or whatever. Yeah.
Association. Yeah. He played the heel, and then Hillary was playing the hero. The heel always gets the sympathy of the crowd because the heel is playing from the point of view of the non-moralizing character. The hero plays the moralizing character, which is often not a sympathetic character. So the heel plays non-moralizing. I'll be the dirty trickster. I'll tell you all of the dirty things and that I'll do. And then the audience, eventually, they come around to supporting the heel.
And if I can add something, for me, when Trump won, there was a lot of discussion about, a man, a woman. But for me, she also lost because she obviously didn't take Trump seriously, and especially because she didn't want to serve. She wanted to become the first female president, but not to serve the people of the United States.
Right. Well, that's been in the framework, again, looking at this from the perspective of Diana Johnstone's long research on the left. She says that in the 1980s, particularly in France, with the rise of Jacques Attali, who was actually, working, initially he was in the Mitterrand government and then in Hollande, so definitely in supposedly a left government. She says that the left began to switch. She says Attali is simply the most dazzling example of semi-official intellectuals who have transformed the left into an elite claiming to possess expertise in doing what is best for the people. The left has evolved from programs to an attitude. And so this attitude actually is that we know how the people should be. And instead of actually working for people, she says, for example, that Attali began to groom his own protege, Emmanuel Macron, who was appointed into his first big political job as the Minister of the Economy in the socialist government of Hollande. Yeah. And his first job was designed to design laws to reduce worker rights. Through all of this, Attali maintained his adherence to the left, which he says is itself a contribution to changing the meaning of the term. And so the left changed from actually advocating for programs, looking at social class, working for the poor, to having an idea about how we should think, how we should speak, and how we should work with our own thoughts and feelings instead of keeping the dialogue open. And so that kind of moralizing is what I believe led the DNC and Hillary to talk about the basket of deplorables, which I think was one of the moments when the Trump began to get support from working class people. A lot of people who are on the left or liberal say, why do working class people support Trump?
I would put it this way. And of course, there is Hillary, but before there is her husband.
Yes.
In the UK, there is Tony Blair.
Yes.
And the movement of the third way, which started somehow, the modern one with Tony Giddens. But it really moved the left, the Labour into New Labour, the old Democrats into New Democrats, but from unions to hedge funds.
Yes, exactly.
So you can also see Mitterrand and Macron.
Right, right. And so she says, I want to read you something that Attali said in 1980. So she sees this not as something that was happening unconsciously or something that was just happening, but something that was actually conceived of and planned. She says, with sweeping good intentions, Attali, looking forward to the establishment of universal justice under global governments, with Jerusalem as an appropriate capital, because Attali readily identifies with the Jewish prophetic tradition, always represented his concern for the betterment of humanity, whose future he predicted in 1980 as that of transhumanism, bright future of people enhanced by spare parts. So even in 19...
What is that? Is that fantasy literature? Sounds like...
No, this is a talk that he gave in 1980 on global...
But it seems like Asimov, or it seems something coming out from a genre that is transhumanism. What is transhumanism?
Okay, so again, I would recommend Harari's book, Homo Deus.
Okay.
So there's a group of people that are connected to Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, which has come, another book, World Without Mind. They came together pretty early, even in the 80s, to begin to establish a kind of moral authority over humanity, with the idea that ordinary human beings don't really know how to work with what is possible for us. And that part of what is possible is immortality and being able also to create an environment where we as Homo sapiens are safe, and we also interact with the other species here on Earth, but within a restrained way. Many things would have to happen. We'd have to reduce the population in order to do that. And so there was a view towards world government and also transhumanism. So transhumanism means that increasingly parts of the human, like the replaced hip, the replaced shoulder, the replaced knee, but also little robots to cleanse the blood, various kinds of chips in the brain so that the brain is enhanced by artificial intelligence. All of that, plus surveillance and very deep surveillance of individuals. It was very, very clear that the early proponents of this is a kind of, it's not even a monopoly, this tech industry thing, it's more like a monarchy. It's like the philosopher king idea. And it is really, it's really pretty much contained in that GAFA group, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, although there's Microsoft in there, but not as close. And so their vision for world governance, for transhumanism, potential immortality of human beings, reducing the population, a vision for how we would live together, no borders, and a world council. And that world council kind of lines up with the really, like I say, the idea is like she calls it, the really smart men. You know,
this makes me think of Fukuyama and what he wrote in the early 90s of global liberal democracy after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Thanks God, last year in his latest book, he said, I was wrong. But then it makes me think of George Bush father, so
yes.
George H. Bush, and his speech at the nation on the 11th of September 1989 when he talked about a new order.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly that. You're absolutely right. And again, Diana Johnston traces it all because it's coming for quite a long time. And of course, then you see 9/11 and you see where we're going to war. But she says the war in Kosovo that was really set up by NATO was one of the very first sort of, you could call it false flags or framing. And then you get the 9/11 thing, the war against Afghanistan, the war against Iraq. These are all Middle Eastern countries also that are framed for these kinds of wars. Not Yugoslavia so much. It was the breakdown of the communist government in Yugoslavia that was she believes, the aim of that war. There's so much, but you know what I want to boil it down to, I would really recommend reading World Without Mind, reading the Diana Johnstone book, the Darkening of the Circle, and also, or The Circle of Darkness, sometimes I reverse the title, and also recognizing through Harari's work that the ideals of transhumanism involve surveillance. And in order for world governance to take over, they needed an event that could be framed in even more sort of hyper fear-based ways than 9/11. 9/11, I think, was the first framed event. Of course, I believe it happened. I don't know why it happened, but it was framed in such a way that Americans gave up a lot of rights to privacy. Also, that we went to war with a number of countries that weren't causing us any difficulty at all. And it seemed like both of our political parties went right along with it. And then, now we have the virus. And so, again, I believe there certainly is such a thing as the COVID-19 virus. It's a coronavirus. It's a form of a cold-like virus. I probably had it. The serological tests are not very good. So, it's like a 25% of false, positivity or negativity. So I can't tell for sure, but my doctor feels that I had it, blah, blah, blah. The framing of that virus has moved the world towards much more compliance. And what are we complying with? We cannot assemble, we can't congregate, but we're on our computers all the time. And we know from Snowden's work, and I again recommend strongly Snowden's book, Permanent Record, that everything that is going on with our computers is being harvested. All of our smart devices, smartphones, robots, etc., in our homes, they're harvesting data. So they're setting up these let's say devices that we depend on, set up a surveillance, and 5G is the cherry on the top. It will be an infrastructure for surveillance. And if you watch anything on, I was watching part of the World Series, 5G was being promoted almost every 3 minutes. That 5G here, 5G there, you need 5G. And actually the whole system isn't even set up yet. But so once you can see this global governance, world order, transhumanism movement, and see how early it began, you see both the right and the left cooperating with it, but you see the left cooperating more smoothly somehow, particularly by absolutely curtailing debate and curtailing debate about climate, because there are many scientists who do not think that we're in a climate emergency, really good scientists, like Freeman Dyson. He signed a letter. He did Infinite in All Directions. He did one of the Gifford lectures years ago. He's a wonderful physicist, died recently. There are many scientists that say we're not in a climate emergency. Many of them also say the solution is not what's being recommended, because in fact, the research that is being done by the United Nations it's curtailed to the human interventions that cause climate change. In other words, they're not researching the non-human issues, the changes in the sun, the changes in the Earth's atmosphere that are not being brought about by humans. So no debate about that. Then when it got into anti-racism, into situations where people are being called white supremacists just by their skin color, or without any possibility of being able to articulate a position. Like I have a family that's interracial, and I come from an interracial past, and so I have never agreed that I'm a white supremacist, or that I have basically a racist attitude. I grew up with Black people, have Black people in my family, blah, blah, blah. Again, why are we in that kind of conversation? It's a conversation that's set up by the left. And the same conversations about transsexuality, about gender, about human rights, immigrant rights, and what happened with immigration in Europe. Again, Diana Johnstone covers it for this long history that is now coming up to the present moment. So in all of these issues, if we were able to have open conversation and debate, if we were able to have true free speech, where we were able to say how we have experienced things, we'd have a chance to really get under the surface of what is happening. But because all of that is curtailed, everything gets kind of sidetracked into calling out. And I saw that happening in the conference too. So one of the issues about moral superiority, and this again, Bion is very good on understanding group process, moral superiority, idealization, and splitting. And he says that when you identify with being a victim, you take a morally superior position. If you feel you are the victim, then you feel that you deserve some special treatment. Now, of course, that is probably useful for people to have that experience. But then we have to review a situation where someone feels victimized to find out, was that intentional? Did it really happen? Was it someone's impression? Because here's the other problem with humans. We have a very strong confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. Whatever we believe, we find evidence for. That
and I would add, especially nowadays, a need for reparation. It's not on plate, it's not on table, the possibility of reparation. If someone makes a mistake
Oh,
unintentionally, at least the mistake is over reparation. But I follow what you say about the moral superior. The inferior behaves morally superior to teach the one who, according to he or she, is really superior. And now we go back to Adler. So really, the beginning of psychoanalysis.
that's right. That's right. And so the problem with moral superiority, it's not simply confined to a savior complex, not by any means. It's often coming through the experience of being a victim. And so again, as a human being, we can do this humanizing of our emotions. The animals really can't. You know, the mouse and my dog, they cannot stop. Once they've invested in the fight flight, they have to go with that. Once they've invested in this disgust, they have to go with that. We don't. We can actually reflect. We can stop. This is what mindfulness is. This is what mentalization is. You could take the word from Buddhism or you could take the word from psychoanalysis. Capacity, we must use it to stop our experiences of morally putting down other people because they disagree with us, especially in moments of crisis or emergency. Because if you feel that you are the done to and someone else is the doer, to use Jessica Benjamin's terms, the doer and the done to in the power dynamic, if you feel that you are the done to, you really have to be careful because you may feel complete disgust for the being or the person that you think has done that to you. And, you know, let's just take the brown field mouse as a simple, innocent example. Many people feel disgusted and will kill that mouse very quickly because they fear that the mouse has brought some kind of disease into their home. So, you know, again, this is a quick response. We have to humanize it. We have to recognize it, or there is no chance that we will be able to stop what is going on now, because there's no political authority that's going to save us from this unrolling of surveillance, world government, you know, transhumanism, interfering with people's sovereignty over their body, vaccinations, what you do with your own sense of illness or virus or whatever. So all of these things are kind of unrolling. They're coming through. Probably doesn't matter what the politics are in any particular place. But what does matter is that we pay attention, that we actually recognize this is the time to really watch carefully, to debate, to recognize that at any moment, people are making mistakes about their sense of being victimized, for example. They're also making mistakes about how to make themselves feel safe. Because, you know, there are many people that have really shut down and stayed at home and on their computer all the time. And there's no understanding there of what the computer is doing in relation to you, you know. So all of these things, I feel, you know, my background as a progressive has always been that that was the most rational way to go. You know, that was the most compassionate way to go. That was the way that I was going to be able to move towards a world in which human beings could care for each other, in which the species could actually get along, to stop war, to stop the violence, to actually correct what we can correct as humans. And now I feel this tremendous loss and fear that the very group that I was turning to for this kind of dialogue is not able now to have that dialogue, whether they're the psychoanalysts or the Buddhists or whoever it is that's also a progressive colleague of mine. So, you know, that's really why I'm emphasizing in such a simple way this issue of moral superiority as a really key issue, because if it undergirds this kind of liberal authoritarianism about what we cannot debate, then there's no hope for the most intelligent people to enter into what has to be a very critical debate and involvement with what is coming forward from world governments, intelligence agencies, technology, working together to unfold something that's been going on for quite a while. So that's kind of a big speech. I'm sort of sorry to unload it on you. I sort of
No, you're not unloading it on me. You're actually giving it to an audience. And I think it's very important because you're spot on. You're saying something that is not very often given to people, and it's not really too easy to follow you. Do we want to follow such discourse? Is it fantasy? Is it happening? Um, I always think that I was born in 1978. So after the 68, after the big crisis of the 70s, at least in Europe, also in the US.
Yes.
And my generation, if you look when we were at high school, we had everything. So we had no need to go out and speak up. Isn't this a consequence of the Marshall Plan, the post-Marshall Plan, Hollywood, the American dream, the American liberal system, and the opposition with the bad guys, the Soviets.
Yeah.
So you're right. And then also the fact, I remember conversation with my peer group, with my friends. The lefties are always right because the fascists are always wrong. Well, the fascists and the communists, Stalinists, are always wrong. So there was, even when we were a teenager, a difficulty to talk about there is something wrong and there is something right, but it doesn't have to be the right is wrong.
Right.
I would say there is no left anymore. Bernie, yes, of course, but what else? I mean,
well, and Bernie went away. It's like they have disappeared him. He's like disappeared. So many things go away. They're like terrorism now is going away. It's like something comes up. So the virus is here, right?
Yeah, Brexit. For Europeans, Brexit was the theme of the past. It's gone away.
It's gone away.
Manipulation. So
yeah, exactly.
Manipulation, and I'm doing these short videos now about theme, and the next one will be about Tinder and the normal cause of love. Of course, the normal cause of love comes from sociology and Beck Gershon, and also Tinder as an application that many people know helps people to connect. But it's the deep meaning of that beyond what we have in society. And the boredom, we don't have time to really think of which kind of society we want to live in, the politician that will lead the country. So as Fromm said in 1941, we vote someone, hopefully he will not give us problem, but this way we create authoritarianism.
Yes. Well, it's also the projection of your own authority into someone else. So you don't have to actually think for yourself. You don't have to go through a process. And you believe then, and I was like this for a long period of my adult life. I really wasn't interested in politics. So I would vote liberal, just vote liberal, Democratic.
Just vote. Yeah.
Just
I
do
see
that.
so many people in Berlin going around just voted. And for me, we're like, does it really count?
Right. And so now, I realize we are in a different spot now. We're in a different moment of time. Maybe this moment has been unfolding gradually, but now it's absolutely necessary that we must stop what we have been doing in terms of shutting down debate, in terms of shutting down the dialogue. We need both sides. We need to be able to actually speak with respect. And, I say this over and over again, that in order to solve any of our problems, we have to work with our own species first. And in order to do that, we have to humanize our species. In other words, we don't dehumanize Trump. We don't treat Trump like he's the orange man. Instead, we recognize he's a person. He has a background, he has a past, he has a family like us. He might even be caught in circumstances like us. He may be trying to do something right. He has done a few things right. And it's ridiculous that that gets erased constantly. And he might have done more really for world peace. He might have done more with the Russians. He might have done more with North Korea. He was stopped by the machinery. So I have to go because I have an 11 o'clock meeting. But, you know, I come back often to what the Buddha taught about hatred, that hatred is never solved by hatred. Never. He says that's an eternal law. And he rarely says anything is eternal because in Buddhism, impermanence is the nature of the world of life and death that we're in. But one of the things that spins the wheel of life and death is hatred. And hatred actually at root for the human being in regard to our species is the dehumanizing of another person. And that is the worst hatred, because then you can kill that person as though the person is an object, or you can put that person into prison, or you can treat that person as a thing, you know, to an object of desire or to rape or whatever. All of those take that dehumanizing as part of the motivation. And so it is, I think, absolutely imperative right now that we stop the hatred and we switch to non-hatred. That doesn't have to be love. It doesn't have to be connection. It simply has to be equanimity, reflection, stepping back, mentalization, mindfulness, holding a space in which we can actually be curious and we can be compassionate. These are our natural capacities to be curious, to be compassionate. One thing is, you know, if you're an analyst or you know if you're in a relationship, when your curiosity and your compassion are blocked, when they are really blocked, you are dehumanizing the other person in that moment. And so you can check yourself. Am I still curious? Am I interested? You know, do I have some compassion where I recognize this other person is suffering too? Those are ways that we can check. And when those are blocked, we can know that we're dehumanizing. And so then we're closing off that capacity to even inquire. So that's, I mean, I feel like right now there's an urgency to get this message out, because I do feel that the COVID virus has been framed for social compliance. And there's now a huge amount of social compliance. And all we would need is a little more framing, you know, that there's a virus that's even more lethal, or that you know, even though the numbers of case fatality are coming down everywhere, that doesn't get reported. You have to look at Johns Hopkins mortality analysis for that. The COVID virus, the real emergency is really over, but it's being framed as though it's ongoing because it's social compliance. So, you know, we need to talk about so many things. And if we're going to get sidetracked into very small identity issues, we are going, all the microaggressions and so on, as Diana Johnstone said, we're going to deal with micro powers, not the macro powers, while the macro powers keep on unrolling. So, again, I appreciate your hearing me on this, and I hope it's helpful to people. I also welcome people to get in touch with me and also to watch the interviews that I'm doing. Many of them, I offer them for free. I've put a lot of my own resources into trying to get this kind of information out. So
I thank you. It was amazing as always. I think the last sentence could be, moral superiority brings to dehumanize Trump, and to beat Trump and those like Trump or these kind of powers, we need to rehumanize Trump.
That's right. That's right. To actually work with, I don't think Trump is the problem.
No, it's the example for the people. For
the people, yes. You have to rehumanize, because you need the dialogue. You need to figure out what is going on? What is going on? In order to defeat racism, in order to protect our climate, whatever is happening to the climate, it is not clear what is happening. The science has not concluded. In order to deal with the virus, whatever the virus is and how it's being framed, but particularly to deal with surveillance and to deal with not being able to congregate, we have to actually talk about all of these issues with other people. And, it really needs to start with the recognition that we all only have a little tiny view of whatever is the truth. We need each other to find it. So I appreciate your work and the interviews, and that's why I wanted to speak with you after the conference. So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
Bye.
Have a nice day.